The presentation is called How Intermodal is Your City? And as we had heard today in the morning, multimodality is an issue, intermodality is an issue if you want to have a sustainable urban transport. So within the Zumba team, we asked ourselves, okay, what does it mean being intermodal, and how can we assess cities with regards to intermodality? And so we had the idea to create an assessment scheme to get a first impression on a city's transport system and how intermodal it is. And that's what I want to present you in a few slides. The first slide I called, why do we need an assessment scheme? Well, there are already many assessment schemes available on the market. On the left-hand side, you see some of them. Some might be well known, some to a lesser extent, but none of them is really addressed. And as we always say, intermodality is a key to a more efficient and sustainable transport system. We should place a focus on that. And another reason why we need an assessment scheme with regards to intermodality is cities are different, and they're definitely good at supporting intermodality. And in that way, cities can learn from each other. And to see who is doing better, or where my city maybe is doing not that good, that's one of the goals for that assessment scheme. Now, I used the term intermodality already a couple of times, and maybe we need to have a deeper look into what means intermodality. Well, on the one hand, and Michael in his presentation today in the morning had that already, we can use different transport modes and transport means on a single trip. As the Project City Multimodal had this nice story, this wake-up story, when you leave home and do all these things during the day. It was all single trips, and the idea was to use always the best transport mode, which is the most sufficient for your needs. And that's on intermodal as well, but it's on a single trip, which means if you commute, for example, from work to home, or the other way around, you might use different transport modes. And I mean, why do we do that? Let us be honest, if it's most convenient, or the most convenient way would be to go with one transport mode from A to B. That's the reason why many people decide to go by car. Because in each step, when we use different transport modes, we have to solve certain challenges, or we have to cross certain barriers. Something like, when is the next train coming? What kind of ticket do I need? And so on and so forth. So why do we do that? Well, we want to optimize our own route, and it's maybe more convenient at the end, maybe time-wise, money-wise, or even with an environmental aspect, to combine the different transport modes. And within the Zumba project, we even decided to that the combination of different transport means within public transport is intermodal. Because if you have a look in the literature, most people would say, well, intermodal transport is if you combine public transport with an own device. So like public transport and car, or public transport and bike. So most people do not differentiate between these different transport means in public transport. But what we see, and what was topic already with micromobility, for example, that we see more and more transport options on the market. So as I always say, public transport becomes more private, and private transport becomes more public in that way. And each change, even within public transport, includes a transfer, which is one of the barriers we need to overcome when it comes to intermodality. So that's the reason why we said, okay, even using different transport means in public transport is intermodal transport. So having that in mind, what were our objectives when it came to the assessment scheme? On the one hand, we said, okay, we want to have an easy to adopt one. So the cities shouldn't do much data gathering. And the data issue is always an issue, even especially when it comes to cities, maybe not in the main Europe, so maybe in Eastern Europe or in the southern part. It becomes an issue if the city gets smaller, maybe that has less data than the larger ones. So keep the data level quite low. That was one of the objectives. The second one was the city should be able to do it themselves. So we provide the assessment scheme, but the cities can do it for themselves. Why is that important? Because some assessment schemes already on the market covering different aspects of transport, they are kind of closed shop. So they're maybe being done every second year with a certain number of cities, and the cities are benchmarked against each other. We want to have an open frame so that the cities can do it by themselves at any time they want. And the third point was it should be applicable to all cities. So when you have intermodality in mind and maybe these new transport offers, you usually have in mind maybe larger cities like Riga, Hamburg, where you have bike sharing schemes, maybe you have even e-scooters. And the smaller cities don't have that, but that intermodalizer assessment scheme should be able to be used in these cities as well. And of course, cities have different situations where they come from, and it should be addressed that as well. And last but not least, the assessment scheme itself should serve as a gateway for a deeper discussion, because the overall aim for intermodality is to integrate to create an integrated transport system. That's what it is about. And on the right-hand side, you see already the main topics we want to cover, and you see they are going from very broad view to very detailed view. But I will come back to that in a second. So the development itself was an iterative process. Was, and it is still. And I will tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Where we came from, of course, we did an extensive literature review to see what is important when it comes to intermodality, what is important from the user perspective, what is important when it comes to political level or policies. We had a review of existing assessment schemes and indices to see what kind of indicators do they use. Is there someone we can use for our assessment scheme? And of course, we had workshops with experts from the consortium. So in a way that we always cross-checked with the objectives I told you a slide before. So it was a kind of back and forth to deal with these different indicators, different aspects to be covered in the intermodalizer. And at the end, it turned out, okay, it's, or let me say the other way around. I mean, in the beginning, we started and said, okay, we want to have it at as much quantitative as possible, but it turned out that's not possible. As I mentioned, to the desired objectives, less data, and so we came to the conclusion to use more qualitative rather than quantitative indicators. So what does the assessment scheme consist of? As I mentioned, we want to cover different levels regarding intermodality, starting from how the intermodal culture, so from the policy level, going over the planning, over user perspectives, until really infrastructure aspects. And we want to do it in a way, as I mentioned, that all cities can use it. So the cities, when they deep into that, they can get 1 point for each effort they do. Up to 1 point, so not only one, but up to 1 point for each of these aspects. So what are the aspects? And here you see them as they are right now. We can start clockwise with the intermodal culture and then go that way around. So what does it mean for us, intermodal culture? So on the one hand, we want to assess how's the political climate regarding intermodality. Is it a topic already in the city? Is the policy level or political level taking care about it, or is it just a minor issue? How well are the cities prepared for the new and emerging mobility concepts, as micromobility, for example? Are they open-minded The introduction note from Rebecca from Bremen showed, so they are very well prepared for the new ones, and they are motivated to integrate new and emerging mobility concepts into their own integrated transport system. But of course, intermodal culture is one part, but then we need to go down to the intermodal planning. So how much is intermodal planning, so from the planning perspective, already in the government? So are they prepared for that? How's the strategic planning culture in the government? And what we discussed, or what we discovered in the discussions with the experts, that it might help in many cases to have a kind of organizational integration. You see, it's now coming to the integration aspect. So as I mentioned, we want to have an integrated transport system, and intermodality is a lot about integrating different transport modes. So, and we discovered a coordinating institution might be necessary to integrate different transport modes, different transport operators. And then it goes further on, of course, to the fare integration. So to which extent are different fares integrated already? How easy is it for me as a user to use different transport means or different transport modes? And are there tickets available already across municipal borders? And I will say a word about that in a second. And of course, do we have a kind of integrated ticketing? What does that mean? Well, of course, you can have tickets for public transport. But if you want to combine different transport means, for example, you want to go by public transport to the city center and then use a bike sharing scheme, do I have to use another app? So how many apps do I have to use, or do I need within the city? For example, here in Berlin, we have several operators for bike sharing schemes, for car sharing schemes, for e-scooters. And of course, they have all their own app. Is it useful for me? Do I really want that as a user? Or is it not for me the case, hey, I want to go from A to B, and I want the most optimized route under my situation, which can mean time, money, or at least interchanges as necessary. And I want to have that all with one app, for example. And that leads me to the next one, the information integration as well. Do I have an intermodal routing system? And Google Maps, unfortunately, is not that intermodal. I want to use different transport modes, and I want to choose which ones I want to use. And then there should be a system telling me, go from A to B and then to C, and use these different transport means or modes. And would be very nice if it's all booked and all just pay once at one stop. And of course, when we come to infrastructure integration, it has aspects like the new emerging mobility hubs. Rebecca mentioned them as well, as they have them in Bremen. And even more cities have them now, or starting to establish such mobility hubs where I can find different transport modes on one place, and I can easily interchange between different transport means and modes. And of course, these aspects of park and ride and bike and ride interchanges is included in that scorecard as well. So that's an overview on the intermodalizer. And I want to very briefly use the few minutes I have to show you the results for the partner cities we have within the Zumba consortium. And you can see we have the cities like, larger cities like Hamburg or Riga, and we have smaller cities like Cholet or Vecchio in our consortium. And each color here in this graph shows one of these main topics. And on the right-hand side, you see the average for the city and FUR. And now it comes to another point where this intermodalizer, the assessment scheme, is quite open. FUR stands for the functional urban area. And as Michael explained today in the morning, why is commuting so important? And commuting is one of the main issues of the Zumba project. The functional urban area describes the city and its commuting boundaries, so where the most of the commuters are coming from. Because in many cities, we have the situation that you have the city itself, maybe well developed already regarding transport, but the hinterland is not very well developed, or the connection between the hinterland and the city is not well developed. In many cases, you have the situation that you have to buy several tickets if you want to go from the hinterland to the city center. Maybe you have to use one ticket for the hinterland and then another one for the city, or maybe timetables are not really adjusted to each other. So and yeah, on the right hand side, you see the average across all cities, and you see that usually in the functional urban area, cities are not that well prepared if they take them functional urban area into account as a city itself. We see that a city like Hamburg, a large one, reaches nearly the full points, so 12 points for now is available, and they reached nearly 10. But even smaller cities like Tartu are doing quite well and can reach up to 8 points. And if you go into more detail and have a closer look, then we see that many cities have already done a lot of efforts to enable intermodal travel chains. But of course, individual aspects still need to be addressed. As I mentioned, in the functional urban areas, we usually have less effort or less points in that case as in the cities. As the municipal boundaries sometimes really play an important role. So we have different priorities, maybe, different players, different actors. Fair integration is always a case in the city. That's nearly always in place already, but the internet is missing, or other different operators are missing. Maybe just the state-owned operators are included in a fair integration, but the private ones not. And of course, some cities, as I mentioned already, have fundamental openness already for new transport modes and are feeling well prepared for the upcoming, what's going on and what's coming. Yeah, and intermodal routing systems are still missing in many, many cities. So it's still an open topic which needs to be addressed. Yeah, so how to use these results? Well, on the one hand, of course, for the cities participating, it's interesting to see who's doing better, and then on the next step to find out what they do better. And that's the approach we did in the Zumba project. So to have an analysis first, then collecting good practice examples, and then further on drawing commuting master plans, as Colin will present in the next presentation. And of course, you can detect your weak points in your city. And then, of course, as I mentioned, find good practice solutions, or find cities that are struggling with the same issues and the same problems and try to develop solutions together. So it should be a starting point for a deeper discussion in your city and then going beyond together with other cities. So, and if you are interested how your city is doing, then, well, of course, I very warm invite you for the workshop we will have tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, there will be one workshop regarding the intermodalizer. Otherwise, please leave your contact details and we will get in touch with you, as we are collecting more and more examples and more cities, or we are trying to convince more cities to use this intermodalizer and to see how we can even how we can compare cities, how well cities are doing, what are doing better, what they are doing less good, and of course to see how we can improve even the intermodalizer, as it is an open tool. So it's not limited to 12 points. We can even add more if necessary, and if more ideas come up, what intermodality should include. So the story goes on with your help and your competences. So thank you very much, and I hope many of you to see tomorrow in the interactive workshop.
Okay, superb, really great one. Looking forward for tomorrow's interactive workshop. We have half a minute for questions, and the first one is Esther is asking, isn't this also mobility as a service that you present? MaaS, as we know. How come this concept is not mentioned?
Yeah, mobility as a service is one of the upcoming trends, maybe. And yeah, of course, we can integrate it. And in a way, it's integrated when it comes to how open are the cities. Yeah, so thank you, Esther, for that question. Of course, mobility as a service can be an option for the future. And to a certain extent, it is integrated when it comes to the planning culture and the new emerging mobility concepts. How open are the cities for that? But it's already quite established in some cities. Yeah, maybe with my perspective of autonomous driving, as that is one of my research topics as well. Yeah, so say, well, it's upcoming. Yeah, of course, mobility as a service itself is already in many cities a place. Yeah, so I will take that into the notes, and thank you for that comment.